Hello, welcome to Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for our 8th grade students, but everyone's welcome. This lesson is the second in this week's series. My name is Mr. Ayers, and I'm an ELA 8th grade teacher in Tennessee schools. I am so excited to be your teacher for this lesson, and welcome to my virtual classroom. If you've not seen our previous lesson, you can find it at www.tn.gov/education. You can still tune into today's lesson if you haven't seen our others. As a reminder, in this lesson set, we are studying some very well-regarded and widely studied poets. We began yesterday by looking at poetry by William Blake. We're going to finish up looking at his poem, The Fly, and then we're going to move on to look at another one of his poems today using that same TP-CAST model that we used. Today, you need paper, pencil, and a surface to write on. Please, if you have your TP-CAST from yesterday, go ahead and take that out, and we're going to revisit that and finish that up to begin. So yesterday, we took a look at the poem, The Fly, and we went through the sections title, where we just considered the title and made a prediction what the poem was going to be about. Paraphrase, we wrote a quick little summary of what, on the surface, what was happening in the poem. And then we looked at connotations. We were looking for the feelings that different words would give us and figurative language. So let's look at the next section, attitude. In this section, we are trying to figure out the speaker's attitude or tone of the poem. Is it humorous or is it sarcastic? Is it thought-provoking? I'm going to read it through one more time for you. And as I do, I want you to jot down some adjectives that you think captures the speaker's tone in the poem. Little fly, thy summer's play, thy thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am not I a fly like thee, meaning a fly like you? Or art not thou, meaning or are you not a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing, till some blind hand shall brush my wing. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the want of thought is death, then am I a happy fly, if I live or if I die? Take about 30 seconds to write those adjectives down that you think describes the speaker's tone in the poem. So I wrote down in my notes reflective, somber, and melancholy, which means a feeling of thoughtful sadness. Remember that the tone is an important tool that the poet uses to affect how you, as the reader, are interpreting the poem. Let's look at the next section, shifts. Most poems have a shift. So a shift is just some kind of change in the poem, and it can be all different kinds of shifts. Sometimes they're very subtle. It's just a moment where there's a realization or a change. It can be big, it can be small, and we'll look for key words like but, however, though, or although. Sometimes punctuation helps indicate the change, like commas, periods, ellipses, semicolons, and maybe line breaks. So let's look through the poem and see if you notice any of those things. Take about 30 seconds to go through and see if you can identify a shift. Have you found one? As you're thinking, write down on the paper where you see a shift happening, and then what do you think that shift means for us as the reader? Great. In my notes, I marked that I think the shift happens when the author moves from observation and reflection, like he's thinking, the fly behaves similar to me. Is it not like me? To a more abstract or intellectual thought concerning life and death, like he's thinking, can I be happy like the fly in life and death? The poem culminates in a pointed thought concerning life and death. Let's consider the next section, title revisited. Here we are looking at the title again to see if it has taken on new meaning after we've done a deep analysis of the poem. So we start thinking about, okay, so what is this title really telling us? Take a moment to write on your paper any changes from your initial thoughts regarding the title. Great. After a deeper analysis, I thought the title, The Fly, really seemed to emphasize both the contrast and the comparison of humans and flies. We are focusing so intently on a tiny insect that is so seemingly different from us, and yet the author is conducting an in depth interrogation or questioning on whether we are so different after all. We're focused on the fly, which may be the same as focusing on ourselves. The last thing we're going to look at is theme. In this section, we are bringing everything together to determine the underlying message of the poem. What does it say about humanity or the world we live in? What is the message? What is the lesson that we're supposed to take from this poem? I believe this poem is doing two things. I think it really helps us to see that we are not much different from other living beings with whom we interact. I also think it focuses on our attention on life as being too short and all the questions we may have about life and death. You may have noticed there are a few different ways we can interpret this poem. This is the beauty of poetry. It is purposely written that way to allow for its readers to uncover different meanings that are so personal to the reader. I hope that you found this tool useful. Keep in mind that that's all it's intended for, a helpful tool to assist us in uncovering a poem's meaning. So today our goal is to read another one of Blake's poems, A Poison Tree, and to use that TP cast strategy that we just finished to better understand this poem. We'll also look at an argumentative essay on the meaning of the poem. I'm going to guide you through that analysis of the essay to see how the author crafted his argument. We'll begin with me reading the poem as a whole, and then we'll reread some sections and pause along the way for you to take a look at it and jot some notes down for a better understanding. So let's read the text. The Poison Tree. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. And I sunned it with smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night till it bore an apple bright. And my foe behold or saw it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. So just like yesterday's poem, this poem contains layers of meaning. Remember that poetry is communicating meaning both directly and indirectly. It is a difficult genre of literature to analyze, which is why we're going to use the tool that will help us do it. So let's refresh our memory about the TP cast. So we start off with a title, then we paraphrase, we look at connotation, attitude and tone, shifts, title, and theme. Go ahead and on your paper, create a quick sketch of this guide. You don't have to write down the words. We're going to go through it. So just kind of like yesterday. Take about 30 seconds just to get that started. Great. So now let's go through the sections. So in the first title, you're just looking at the title of the poem, The Poison Tree, and you're just going to try to make some kind of guess as to what this poem is going to be about. Go ahead and write something down. Great. In my notes, I put the title, A Poison Tree, indicates two things. First, poison is obviously bad, and I should expect a description of something that is harmful. Second, a tree is something that grows only in time and only with proper nourishment. So this time, let's quickly read through the poem again, and you can pause as we go and take some notes on paraphrasing. Remember that paraphrasing is just a quick summary. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears, and I sunned it with smiles and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night till it bore an apple bright. My foe beheld or saw it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. Take about 30 seconds just to finish up your paraphrase in that section. So my paraphrase looks like this. I'm figuring out what to do with my anger. I noticed when I addressed my anger openly with my friend, it went away. Though when I held it inside, my anger against my enemy, it grew. And all my fears, sorrow, and fake smiles only made it grow. And it just kept growing until it grew fruit. My enemy decided to steal the fruit, and that resulted from that anger, and he ended up poisoned or dead from it. So can you see that I just kind of kept my paraphrase casual and simple? I'm just trying to do the literal ideas I find. I'm not digging into the poem yet. Now, the next section is connotation, and it's the feeling, the ideas that the words invokes in addition to the literal meaning. This is where we start digging a little bit deeper. So go through the poem and see if you can find some of those words that you feel that the author is using to help push us deeper into the poem. Look for figurative language as well. See what you can come up with. Great. So here are some things that I noticed. I noticed the author moves from speaking of his anger more literally in the first stanza to speaking about it more figuratively as we go through the poem. He used natural terms like watered, sun, and grew till it bore an apple bright. It's almost as if his anger has become something separate from him. I also noticed the use of language of night and morning and day and night through the poem, which seems to imply that his anger is consuming him like a poison. All right, now let's look at attitude. Remember, this is it humorous? Is it sarcastic? Is it sad, melancholy? Jot down some adjectives that you feel capture the speaker's tone in this poem. I wrote in my notes reflective, convicted, and certain. Remember, the tone is an important tool that poets use to affect how you, as the reader, are interpreting the poem. The next section is shift. Most poems have a shift, though it may be subtle. This is the moment there is a realization or change in the poem. So remember, we talked about those key words like but, however, though, although, and then some punctuation can also indicate shifts. Commas, periods, ellipses, semicolons, and line breaks. Do you see that in the poem? Take a moment and write down on your paper where you think you see a shift happen. Awesome. So in my notes, I put the shift happens right after the wrath becomes an apple bright. That is when the enemy sees the apple, sneaks into the garden late at night, and eats it, only to find himself poisoned or dead by the morning. The first part of the poem was the build up and the reflection on wrath. After the shift, everything comes to a head as the enemy takes action against the speaker's wrath, only to find himself poisoned and dead at the end of the poem. So in the title Revisited, I took a look at the poison tree title again. And here I wrote that it really seemed to emphasize the result of anger. The speaker does not address his wrath very well. In fact, he feeds it through neglect. He fails to address it. He ignores it and things get worse. In many ways, anger breeds anger. This seems very clear at the end of the poem when the enemy attempts to steal it, only to be poisoned and potentially dead himself. So let's look at the last section now, theme. And remember that this is where everything kind of comes together and we get the underlying message of the poem. What does it say about the humanity or our world? What lesson do we learn from this? Take a moment and write down what you think the theme of the poison tree is. All right. So in my notes, I wrote, I believe this poem really emphasizes the danger of anger. If we address it directly, it most often goes away. If we let it fester or linger, we just make things worse. The more time goes by, the more it not only affects ourselves, but it affects other people too, much like poison. Awesome. So here we're going to do some guided practice. We're going to have an opportunity to look at an argumentative essay that is designed to convince the reader of the author's interpretation of the poem. This is not correct or accurate necessarily because poems are open for interpretation as long as it's valid and you can support what you think. So let's pause and think a moment before we read the article. This is not the first time you have read and analyzed argumentative text. What are some most the important elements that you find in an argumentative essay? What does the author need to make sure that they include? So some things that I come up with my students are these four things. It is clear what the writer is arguing. The author includes evidence to support the claim. The author also needs to do an effective job of providing analysis that connects the evidence to the claims. And the last one is cohesion, or how effective the ideas connect together. So now we're going to read the analysis of a poison tree. As I read, on your paper, just write down some thoughts as you go through. I tell my students these are kind of your first thoughts. Write those down, and then we're going to go back and we're going to break down that argument together. In the second stanza, Blake introduces the metaphor of the speaker's wrath as a living, growing thing. The speaker says, "And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears." The speaker's anger is now likened to a growing seed, sunned with his fake smiles and deceitful wiles. In other words, he nurtured his anger in secret rather than expressing it honestly and directly. His feelings are very strong, yet he keeps them hidden from others. Also in this stanza, Blake's use of the similar phrases night and morning and both day and night suggests that he never stops thinking about his anger. This exaggeration or hyperbole effectively conveys to the reader that the speaker's wrath has become an obsession. Finally, the speaker's hidden feelings take on the form of a shiny, bright apple. The enemy steals and eats the apple without the speaker's knowledge. In the last stanza, the speaker is happy to find his enemy sprawled out under the tree, poisoned by the apple he has eaten. The speaker says, "And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine." This part of the metaphor shows that the speaker has deceived the enemy by hiding his true feelings. Similarly, the false attitude that the speaker portrays toward the enemy is represented by the beautiful bright apple that shines on the surface, that is deadly inside. Just as there are negative feelings behind the deceivingly nice treatment of the enemy, there is a poison inside the apparently perfect piece of fruit. In A Poison Tree, William Blake uses figurative language to dramatic effect as he explores what can happen when a person refuses to let go of grievance or a grudge against another person. Through the use of an extended metaphor that compares unexpressed anger to a tree that bears deadly fruit, Blake seems to be warning readers that when resentment is watered with fears and negative feelings, the situation can have very negative consequences. The speaker suggests a better alternative in the first stanza. "I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end." So now I want you to go back and let's think about some questions that you will work on for the remainder of the class and for some independent practice. I want you to reflect on what we learned in today's poem, A Poison Tree. And we've looked at an argumentative essay and talked about the effective components. So we have two questions here for you to consider. What stood out to you the most regarding William Blake's poem, A Poison Tree? What are some lessons you can learn from it that you can apply to your own life? What did you learn the most in our analysis of the argumentative essay? Although it can seem a bit tedious to learn the components of good argumentative writing, why do you think it's important? And finally, in what ways could it help you be an effective communicator? Take about 30 seconds to write down those questions. So, to finish wrapping up and to bring you back to some information that we covered so that you can better answer your independent questions, remember that we said that effective argumentative essays have four components. It is clear what the writer is arguing. The author includes evidence to support the claim. The author also needs to do an effective job of providing analysis that connects the evidence to the claim. And finally, it must have cohesion. It must effectively bring the ideas together. Wow, what a powerful lesson today. I have really enjoyed working on analyzing Blake's poetry and studying an argumentative essay with you. Thanks for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you in the future in our next lesson in Tennessee's At Home Learning Series. Thanks a lot. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.